I've been ruminating on the idea of trauma. And for those of you who aren't aware, ruminating is just a fancy word for contemplating. That's a bad habit that I have from being overeducated in higher institutions. I tend to pull words from my vocabulary that I was forced to learn along the way as a part of my educational journey. But let's say I've been contemplating the idea of trauma and the effect that it has on people. And all of us are dealing with some level of trauma. At some point in our lives, we've experienced this in varying degrees. Some is more extreme than other types, but we can all relate to experiencing traumatic events. The issue, of course, is, are you aware enough of it and how it affected you to integrate it in a way that it is not getting in the way of becoming who you were meant to be? In other words, it's not holding you back in that way. And along those lines, I wanted to tell a story from when I was younger, around the ages of, let's say, 8 to 25. This is a long period of time because I'm dealing with a story about one of my good friends. I went over to his house a lot. He came over to my house a lot. It was a very common thing to be hanging out together in the presence of each other's parents. And at a certain point, I guess he felt like he could trust me enough to tell me what had actually happened to him when he was a kid. I mean, young age, like 5 years old. We were talking and he said, "You know my mom and dad, right?" And I said, "Yeah, they're great, whatever." I said the things that you say in small talk when you're a kid. "Yeah, I know your parents. Well, what's up?" And he goes, "Well, that's not actually my mom and dad. That's my aunt and uncle." And I was like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And he said, "Yeah, my parents, when I was really young, died in a car accident, both of them at the same time. And me and my sister had to go live with my aunt and uncle. And we've been doing this for so long that I just call them my mom and dad at this point, but they're not actually my real mom and dad." And I was blown away by this. I had no idea, and it just has always been something that I look back on as an impactful moment, something that really affected me. As far as one of the first times that I understood the kind of tragedy that can happen to you just from being alive. There really isn't anything you can say when someone tells you something like that. You're kind of left speechless. But especially when you're a kid, you kind of just say, "Well, hey man, I'm sorry that happened to you. I feel really bad." And, then he says, "Oh, well, don't feel bad. It's okay. I've come to terms with it in as many ways that you can come to terms with something like that. And we're doing the best that we can." And he did tell me at one point there would be times where he was all alone and no one was around, and he would think about it and start crying and process the emotions in that way. But the reason that I bring this story up is because looking back on it, I now understand things about him that I didn't when they were actually happening. And I'll explain this so you understand what I mean. When we got to high school and we started drinking and smoking, this pattern started to emerge in his behavior where he was very anti-authority. I mean, nobody could tell him what to do. That was one thing we all knew. You cannot tell this guy what to do. He will not respond well to that. And we just start noticing this pattern with him where maybe we were at a concert or a party or somewhere, and some kind of authority figure would try to tell him what to do, and he would just rebel immediately. You can't tell me what to do. I mean, it would express itself in different ways than him just saying that. And what I later realized about the situation was that he had just not processed the trauma of losing his parents fully, meaning his resistance to all authority was a rebellion deep down inside of him to the fact that he lost his parents very unfairly when he was very young. And so in his mind, anybody that was trying to tell him what to do was trying to take the place of his parents who were not there. So to him, it's like, you can't tell me what to do. The only people who could tell me what to do are my parents, and they're not here. They got taken from me. So don't even try to tell me what to do. And that was what was expressing itself out of him in those moments where a police officer or the owner of a place or the owner of a house, whatever it was trying to exert some type of authority over him, right? A teacher trying to tell him what to do. He was very combative and rebelled against it. It's very easy to see that in hindsight from an outside perspective. Oh, that's what was going on there. But only I and a very small amount of people around him knew what had really happened to him. In other words, the general public viewing his behavior would think he was an outrageous individual in those moments, right? And that's a very important lesson as it relates to observing other people's behavior. There's so much trauma in this world, and a lot of it is so awful that it's not something that you just discuss with anyone, right? You have to be in a very specific environment with someone you know you can trust, who you simultaneously know isn't going to cast some kind of judgment on you for telling you what happened to them. And that's just a rare thing in this world. So most people keep that severe trauma bottled up inside, and then it manifests in ways like it did for my friend, in ways that they can't control because they haven't processed it. This happens obviously with people who are exposed to sexual molestation at a very young age. I mean, that just destroys an individual very early on, but they don't understand how it destroys them until it manifests in their behavior later when they're older. You'll see these type of people have a lot of difficulty holding on to a relationship. Why? Well, it's pretty simple, right? Molestation or sexual abuse or even emotional abuse on that kind of level is so devastating to the innocence of the being that they lose trust in so many things that a person who doesn't experience this maintains. So that when they get older, at the age where relationships begin, they only have two ways to approach situations in a way that seems very bipolar when you interact with them. They're either all the way on or they're all the way off. And that's a defense mechanism to the trauma that they experienced in their life along those lines. When they are thinking about being intimate with someone on that level, that's when the trauma really revisits itself. And if they're feeling like they want to explore that and they're feeling safe in that way, they'll flip the switch on in their mind and they'll be very open. I mean, maybe too open with somebody, right? Along those lines. And they shower that other person with energy in this way. But then as soon as that trauma is triggered in some way where they're not feeling safe, they pull their energy back, they flip the switch off, and then they're very cold with the same person. And you can see how if you are bipolar in that way, dealing with another person who you are having a relationship with, well, the other person, after being ping-ponged back and forth, like that is just going to eventually leave the situation. Like, I can't do this up and down thing where you're constantly like giving me attention and then taking it away, giving me energy, then taking it away. And that cycle or pattern repeats itself over and over again, where the person has a lot of difficulty holding on to relationships. And not just intimate relationships, this is any kind of relationship, because those trust issues follow you into any kind of relationship that you're trying to have. Now, again, similarly, from the outside looking in, you might say, just as an objective observer of the situation, if you were not involved in it, you might say, hey, this person is mean, they're mentally ill, they have something wrong with them. But if you get to know them and you understand that their state of being and the way they approach relationships is the result of what happened to them when they were younger and they were sexually abused or emotionally abused, or they lost a parent or two parents like my friend, you can see how those things impact the way that people interact once they become older and more mature in a way where they think they have everything handled. And then these things are subtly operating under the surface in a way that sneaks up on you. And then the next issue is, because we're on planet Earth suffering from these delusions and all of the parasitical influence on our stream of consciousness, then on top of all of that, while we might recognize certain traumas eventually, there's that aspect of the situation where no one ever wants to admit that they are responsible for anything. So it's a way to kind of blame everyone else for the situation that you find yourself in, as opposed to accepting personal responsibility for your role in situations. And trauma in that way can give you an out. You can, once you're aware of it, anyway, blame it for the reason you are the way that you are, and then never accept any kind of responsibility for your own actions. I mean, that's how we're trained to interact anyway, by the media, always pointing our finger at someone else for the reason why we are in the situation that we are in. That's what all of social media is designed to do. It's designed to give each and every person a reason for why they are in the situation that they are in, and then the solutions will supposedly fix that situation. Which again is doing something to the system that will fix your problem without you ever having to address it on your own. This is what empathy is. This is what social intelligence is. A simple way to put it would be, don't judge a book by its cover. Understand that all of us have some kind of trauma that we are working through, and that is impacting the way we interact with other people. And sometimes people don't even know it. It takes an outside observer to see it and point it out to them. In which case you should be even more emotionally intelligent about your interactions with those people. Let me put it to you like this. Human beings are social, tribal creatures, and a certain brotherhood or sisterhood forms when tribal social beings go through an intense experience together. You have a bond that just can't be broken, and on top of that, it can't be understood by people who didn't go through the experience with you. In other words, instead of looking at all of the differences that we have collectively as a human race, we should be bonding together over our shared trauma. Instead of saying, oh, hey, you look like this, you come from this place, you must be this, based on what the media has put into your mind about how we're supposed to think about other people who are different from us. Instead of doing that, we should be looking at them like, oh, hey, you're on planet Earth too with me. You've been exposed to the same parasite that I've been exposed to. We should be bonding over this intense, insane experience together and finding the similarities in our experience in that way. It's the ultimate brotherhood or sisterhood of collective humanity in that way. Because every one of us has experienced something that traumatized us, that formed the basis of our personality, whether we were aware of it or not. Now, hopefully you can see how what I'm describing here also applies to YouTube and to people who are searching for the truth now on the internet. Every single person with a YouTube channel, myself included, who is doing that has thousands upon thousands of experiences that are coloring their view of the world and what this place is. And as a result, they gravitate towards certain types of information over other types of information. And sometimes the gravity of that is so strong because of what they experience that you simply cannot tell them anything different. And from the outside looking in, you say something along the lines of, man, that person is stubborn, or man, that person is so blind in this one spot. They can't see the truth of it, what it really is. But that stubbornness and that blind spot is most likely the result of the way that their personality formed around everything that they experienced, including the traumas in their life. And a lot of the things that people gravitate towards believing helps relieve certain aspects of that trauma. Indeed, if my friend that I was referring to went down this path and was on the internet, he would have gravitated towards personalities and information that was very rebellious and anti-authority. He would have been all about that kind of material. And this is where YouTube and all social media along those lines is so similar to the mainstream version of it that existed prior, where you are drawn more to personality than information, because they have all kinds of different personalities giving out the same information. An example that everyone listening to this will know, just because you've all gone through the same stages and listened to the same information, is Alex Jones versus James Corbett. Now, when you really break down what they are giving out information-wise, it's the exact same information. It's just Alex Jones has a personality that is very different than James Corbett. And one personality is designed to appeal to the more boisterous, animated, fiery personality, the kind of personality that likes telling it like it is and speaking truth to power and that kind of energy, right? And then James Corbett is on the other side of that, on the other extreme, designed to appeal to a more academic mindset. He's designed to mimic a professor discussing conspiracy theories. They're describing the exact same information, but you're drawn to one or the other depending on what type of personality that you have. Because you listen to one of them and you say, oh, I like the way he is talking about this. And that's kind of secondary to the information because they're talking about the same information. A lot of you guys listening to me right now, it's not even the information that you like, it's the personality that's similar to yours. You like the way I describe things and you just like the way I carry myself because you're probably similar to me. Now, sure, I'm giving out good information here and there, so there will be people who don't like my personality or don't like the way I carry myself who still listen just because they want the information. And that's going on everywhere. People will listen to those who they don't necessarily vibe with because the information is good. But I'm more referring to actual real people on YouTube here, not people like Alex Jones and James Corbett. That was just a good example of what I'm referring to that everyone will understand, because I don't want to get into names of other people. But you can see the same thing in the mainstream where, like, Fox News, for example, would have different anchors on their schedule from 4 p.m. to midnight. And each anchor is discussing the same news stories and the same information with the same bias and the same spin. But a person listens to their favorite of those anchors because of the personality that they express the information through. And then it's the same thing on like CNN or MSNBC or any of the other mainstream American news outlets. I'm sure it's the same way in Britain with the BBC and the Daily Mail and all the other outlets that are there, or whatever country you are from. It's the same formula. This is why they choose the actors that they choose for president, because they know that a lot of people don't even care about the platform. They just watch the debate on TV and they're like, I kind of feel that guy. I like the way he carried himself. I'm going to vote for him. And so that is going on the highest scale as far as media goes, as much as it's going on the lowest scale, like my YouTube channel, which is the lowest of the low scales, right? I don't even have 1,000 subscribers after making videos for almost 9 years. So I suppose part of this is advice for those of you who will eventually create your own videos, in the sense of just be who you are. Don't try to be something that you're not. Don't try to appeal to something that isn't you. In being yourself, you will attract an audience that is similar to you in how you approach life. And if you think about what larger scales would potentially do to get information out there, well, they would have a bunch of different personalities giving out pretty much the same information, but appealing to a wide range of people in a variety of ways that one person alone wouldn't be able to do normally, unless you're resonating on a different frequency that transcends everything, which is the kind of thing that's very rare, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that the man they call Jesus did. Seeing as how none of us are that, we have to kind of stay in our lane and just be who we are, and we will speak to those who were drawn in to hear it in that way. But also knowing at the same time, this is where patience comes in, and this is where emotional intelligence and empathy comes in. You won't be able to change certain minds. There are some people, because of whatever happened during the formation of their personality, they are so stubborn and you cannot tell them anything. And I'm going to relate a story about this from a YouTuber that I've followed for a long time now. And I want to be respectful of this because it's a difficult situation. So I'm not going to give the name. Maybe some of you will know who I'm talking about just because it's a small world, this subject matter, but please, if you know who it is, don't dox them in the comment section. Don't bring attention to their situation. We don't need to know who it was to get a lesson from it. Indeed, most of the things that I talk about in the third person are things that I personally have experience with. So I'm using myself as the example. I'm judging myself more than anyone else. Other people give me lessons that improve on my ability to judge myself. You see, that's what self-awareness is. Observing your mind in the third person, observing your thoughts as they form in the third person. It's almost like being out of body in that way. That's what self-awareness is. I did a whole recording on that by the same title about going within, if you want to check that out in further detail. But there was this YouTuber who had this kind of personality, right? And it's really sad, actually, what has transpired. He had health problems years ago. And as you tend to do when you experience severe health problems, you start looking anywhere and everywhere for a solution. Things that seem crazy a year ago when you heard it, now all of a sudden you're like, hey, let me hear more about this, because your survival's on the line, and that's just what you do. So he starts looking for alternatives to his problem, and eventually he stumbles upon this guy called Anthony William, the medical medium he goes by. And at the time, he was a heavy standard American diet type of guy. He was eating a lot of meat, a lot of cheese, a lot of processed food, and having all kinds of like kidney problems and stuff like that. So he has this session with Anthony William, and he tells him to start juicing and start eating a bunch of fruit and totally change what he was putting into his body. And this guy heals himself from his issues through this process. Now, I don't know if Anthony William was the one who told him to do this, but he eventually became a raw vegan as a part of trying to heal himself. And he was a raw vegan for many, many years. And people would leave comments in the past few months and years like, hey man, you're looking a little rough, because he started getting that sunken in look that long-term vegans get in their face, especially the eyes. And he just wouldn't hear anything of it. And I totally understand that because I went through the same thing. When I was a vegetarian, you couldn't tell me that I needed to eat meat. I had decided that this was the absolute truth. We're not supposed to eat meat. We're not supposed to eat animals. I don't need to do that. I'm fine. And I learned the very hard way that that wasn't true for me. Could be true for other people, genetically speaking, but for my genetics, it's not true. Now, maybe I could do it if I used supplements and science, but at that point, I'm willingly giving myself an autoimmune disease. I'm willingly giving myself pernicious anemia at that point, and that just seems insane in hindsight. So anyway, he was very similar in that way because he viewed Anthony William as having saved his life by telling him to do what he did. The problem, of course, is that any naturopath, any alternative health physician would have said the exact same thing. Hey, get off processed foods. You got to stop eating what you're eating. You got to completely change your diet. And he probably would have healed his issues in the same way. But because this one person was the one who did it, he attached this idea that he had saved his life. Accordingly, you could not tell him anything about Anthony William or any of the really suspect things that were going on with him. I mean, he was on national television with Mario Lopez. Saved by the Bell, Mario Lopez, Entertainment Tonight or whatever he hosts. And he's been on morning news shows. And his whole thing is he claims to get direct communication from spirits, he calls it. And he claims to be able to just look someone over and diagnose them based on, his interpretation psychically of them. And needless to say, there are a lot of questions to be asked of people claiming things like that. But you could not tell him one way or the other. So, forgetting about all of that, fast forward to he does a video a month or so ago from the hospital. And he goes into his health problems and lets us all know that he's been bedridden for months at this point, and he's down to 95 pounds. He's in the hospital, weighs 95 pounds, really sick with something. And instead of questioning his raw vegan diet as a potential contributor to what happened to him, he's doing what I did and what other people do in these situations, where you are looking for reasons other than that to explain the situation you found yourself in. And he had this scarring on his lungs, so it could have been COVID or something along those lines that he caught. But again, it's like how many healthy people your age catch COVID and have that happen to them, right? You're not connecting the dots that something you're doing to your body and the advice you're following in a guru fashion led you to the position where this thing was able to put you in your bed unable to move and bring you down to 95 pounds, right? You're not connecting the dots. You're trying to blame yourself in other ways. He actually said at one point that he blamed eating a vegan cooked meal over and over again from some Indian restaurant as part of the reason it happened. And it's like, man, there are people who eat, McDonald's 4 times a week who don't have reactions to pathogens like you're having right now. You really need to open your eyes about what's going on here. But this is the thing. This is the whole point of me telling the story. In the actual video that he uploaded, he put medicalmedium.com in the description box, and then he pinned a comment in the comment section saying, "Do not give me health advice. I already know everything I need to know." And my jaw's on the floor, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for this guy. Like, he's so stubborn and he's so stuck in his own mind with this thing that even at his worst, even in his most dire of circumstances that he's ever been in his whole life, he's telling you, don't give me advice. I already know. And it's just like, it's the saddest thing I've ever witnessed on YouTube. I really hope he pulls out of it, and I'm sending him some positive vibes, like, figure this out, man. But it's a tragedy. I mean, hopefully he pulls out of it and he'll figure out, like I did, going through my traumatic experience, the error of my ways. But like, sometimes you just can't tell somebody something, no matter how obvious it is to you. They just are not going to be receptive to it, and you have to let them go at that point, right? You can't force yourself on them. That's a part of having emotional intelligence. Yes, I went into a lot about trauma impacting the way someone is and not judging a book by its cover and giving people latitude in that way. But at the same time, you have to see the other side of it and be intelligent enough emotionally to know when something has run its course and you simply cannot help someone because they refuse to let you help them see something. They just will not allow it. And at that point, you have to just step back and say, okay, I'll just love you in secret, right? I don't need to tell you about it. I don't need to express that to you. Just know that I'll be thinking about you and pulling for you in that way. This really underscores the danger of the alternative health information on YouTube as well. This stuff can kill you. And there's a lot of characters who are running a business and distorting information on purpose, giving out bad advice on purpose because that's just the world we live in. And do you think they would be at your funeral if their advice killed you? No, of course not. So you really need to be careful and take ownership of this information and not say, oh, well, that person said this, so it's their fault if it doesn't work. No, this is your life we're talking about. You need to really internalize it and make the decision on your own to do these things. So that when the information is potentially challenged, it's challenging you and not some loyal bond you have with someone else who helped you in some way or gave you some advice that cured something in some way. And I'm not telling you to not pay attention to this information because it can save your life at the same time that it can kill you. This information saved my sister's life. I told this story in an older recording, but she was seeing neurologists about this neurological problem she was experiencing, and they were diagnosing her with MS because she had the start of lesions in her brain. And I start asking her what her diet was, figuring out what she was eating, and I found out she was eating obscene amounts of aspartame, drinking diet sodas, putting the artificial sweeteners in her coffee, chewing the gum that has aspartame in it. I mean, it was just bombarding her system. And when you look at the literature of aspartame, it causes lesions on the spine and in the brain. And there are all kinds of women who drink diet soda who get diagnosed with MS from this toxin in their body. And if I didn't tell my sister that, if I wasn't able to find that information online and see who started or who was in control of Searle when they created aspartame and who got it through the approval process, which was Donald Rumsfeld, incidentally also the same company that created remdesivir. But if I wasn't able to find that information, my sister would be in a wheelchair right now, or worse, right? So it can save your life. It's definitely worth looking into, but you have to see the other side of it too.